What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, reviewing today the Resident Evil 2 Remake. The time is finally here. We can at last sit down and dig into this masterpiece. I am a huge lover of Resident Evil. I grew up with the series, and as a child, I became very obsessed with RE2 specifically, because it managed to do something very different. It was terrifying, yes, but it also had multiple characters, different pathways, and a lot of things that tried to challenge you with its scares. It wanted you to be afraid, but also think about the fear that it was inflicting. So when I was going into this remake, I was a little bit worried that they wouldn't be able to replicate that magic, to make this scary in a different way, but I can honestly say that they managed to pull it off. The Resident Evil 2 remake is nothing short of a stellar masterpiece, but beyond that, this is something that I think is actually far better than the original ever was. This is not a beat-for-beat redo. It's not just the same game with a different camera angle. Instead, this time we are seeing a complete rebuilding of Raccoon City that's simply using a little bit of the same bricks. Within this game, they've actually rewritten certain plot points to make them fit in better with the later Resident Evil games. They've done some things to make the monsters far more scary. They've actually changed around all the puzzles, but the biggest thing is obviously that this is now a third-person shooter. This is the thing that really is the most drastic, but also the part that makes this game by far more terrifying, because now you are fully in control of being able to see exactly where the monsters are coming from when they eventually come to eat your face. Now, in case you never tried it, the original version of Resident Evil 2 had very limited processing power, and one of the ways they got around this was with fixed camera angles, which meant that you would basically see your character from off in the distance, and every time they were about to leave the screen, it would change camera angles. And it was basically the game's way of trying to make it where it could have lots of different kinds of creatures on screen at once without bogging down the processor. But now, we're in the future. We're able to have as many zombies on the screen as once and do whatever we want. And I love this because now they've really managed to tinker with that freedom. Just to be quite fair, the zombies here are about 80 times harder to kill. Let me just show you a normal fight. Let's do this one right here. So these things look like just shambling corpses, something that would be put down with a single headshot. But that's not exactly the case. There's two things that a lot of people don't consider, which is that, number one, the human skull is very thick. Piercing it, even with a low caliber bullet, is very difficult, which means that you need to perfectly aim that shot. And the other facet is the fact that you need to totally destroy the brain in order to put a zombie down. If you just destroy the part of their brain that feels emotions or the part of their brain that enjoys the taste of waffles, they're still going to try and eat you. It needs to completely destroy the head in order to stop them. And this doesn't even count the fact that there are actually much harder monsters out there like lickers, who are going to eat you over and over again. But this is what I like about it. The true fear of Resident Evil is what a lot of people like to call save one bullet, which is that you are not going to necessarily have enough ammo to kill every single monster. These guys don't drop ammo. Instead, you need to constantly scavenge, finding new supplies, getting gunpowder, and combining it to try and get additional ammo in case there's a surprise encounter. But even still, eventually, you will try and have to get away no matter what it costs you. I'll fully admit that there were a lot of times where I actually died in a panic, because these zombies will surround you, and if they want, they will grab you, they'll bite you, and eventually take you down. These changes to control and setup is so cool because it makes it where whenever you find that next big weapon, it feels properly rewarding. It feels like you've just discovered this whole new way to play. Like when you're playing as Leon or when you're playing as Claire, they actually have some pretty different stories. They go to different places, they see different characters, and they actually get to go to different parts of the game itself, which means they also unlock different weapons. Like, let's just center here for a second on Claire Redfield. She gets a flame-throwing grenade launcher. This is a very beastly weapon, and by the time I finally found it, I was very hungry for anything to defend myself. I was low on handgun bullets, I hadn't been able to upgrade it very much, and I knew that if I wasn't able to blow up that next enemy I encountered, I would definitely get to game over. With that being said, dying is not as big of a deal as it once was. In the original versions of Resident Evil, a lot of times the only way you could come back is when you died, restoring a checkpoint. Your manual saves were the only time you could actually pop back to life. Walking up to a typewriter and saving the game was where you would come back. But now, there are actually a lot of hidden autosave checkpoints, like cutscenes or really big doorways. It makes it where you don't have so much of a gloom hanging over your head, making you terrified of a mistake because it could set you back 30 minutes. If you die, it's not a giant deal, but I like that about it. And it seems like the developers have realized that since they can put these checkpoints in, they don't mind killing you all the freaking time. Like, let me just talk about Mr. X. There is a giant monster that will constantly hunt you throughout a majority of the game who looks like a 9-foot tall dude in a trench coat. This guy can open doors, he can smell you, he knows where you're at. And since he's just 400 pounds of muscle, you will hear him coming. His heavy footsteps are terrifying, and every time you see him bust down that next door coming for you, you know that you're probably screwed, because he's invincible. You can shoot him in the face enough to make him fall down for a second, but Mr. X always gets up. You have to run, and since the game knows that it can just completely butcher you whenever it wants, sometimes it'll throw Mr. X at you just to kill you for laughs. This is the kind of stuff that I think is such a great positive change to Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's so nice that they're really kind of leaning more into the elements of making this game even bigger and even more terrifying. But by far, the best part of all is the stuff that doesn't involve bullets, it doesn't involve monsters, it's the world itself. This is truly a living, breathing representation of Raccoon City. There are so many subtle things that are going to scare you worse than the monsters themselves. Like, at one point, I was trying to explore all these side rooms of the police station, and I found this board. It was a chalkboard where somebody had actually written the names of everybody who was still alive, but you could see that they had over time crossed them out one by one until eventually they just wrote everyone's dead. There was so much conveyed in this. It's a tiny detail, but it really struck home the fact that nobody here wanted to die. Every single one of these zombies that you see shambling around, these were people who fought as hard as they could to keep breathing and eventually failed. And if you make a mistake, you will certainly be next. Now, the last thing I really want to talk about is just the side modes, because I think it's neat that they brought back some of the bonus stuff. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but there is one that's pretty neat where you can actually play as an extra character who's a super hardcore soldier and go on a different path through Raccoon City. That's neat. The other thing I really like is that there is actually different modes. You can actually play this on different difficulties, turn on different amounts of auto-aim, which I don't think you'll need. The game is easy enough. And the last thing is that there are actually main scenarios and secondary scenarios, so you can actually see more parts of the story the more times you beat it. I love that. I love a game that rewards your dedication. This is the exact game I always wanted. We're truly seeing the next dawn of Resident Evil. I so badly want to see them do this now with Resident Evil 3 and put this much polish into it. And then do Code Veronica. Give us this great experience. A fresh look at an old game to remind us why the classics can still be classic. With all this goodness being said, I do want to say that there is one teeny tiny flaw I want to talk about, which is that I do think that it's a little bit too easy to sometimes bump into the programming, so to speak. Every one of the zombies definitely have areas they are allowed to go to, and they're not. Even Mr. X actually has areas that he is not allowed to walk into. So if you're running from him and you step inside a mission room where you're going to have the next big story beat happen, he will automatically just stop and you'll just hear him standing outside the door waiting to ambush you. Or you'll see a zombie just stop in an open doorway because they know that some plot point's going to happen and they don't want to follow you. It's a very tiny gripe. It's just something that I wanted to warn you about, that sometimes the zombies are going to behave a little bit peculiar. Okay, so we've heard a ton of good and one thing that's bad, but let's go over the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving the Resident Evil 2 Remake a 10 out of 10. If there was a way I could open up a time portal right now and show my little 12-year-old self this game and show him, hey, in the future, your favorite thing that's ever been made actually expands into this great new adventure, he would have had his face explode off his head. I love this game. I love every frame of it. I love every plot point. I love every spooky spot we get to see. It is a game that literally everybody needs to buy. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming.
Yeah, everyone.
This is the Resident Evil they really want.
You're all fired. I want you all to know exactly how fired you are.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.